Well, good evening and good to be back with you again on Geelong Newsbeat. You may or may not have picked up the story last week. It broke on 3AW's breakfast program, which is always containing interesting stories, about a young 16-year-old who'd been at the races on the VRC's Family Day, the last day of the Spring Carnival at Flemington, and apparently had taken the $2 quadrella and it came home, and he had a ticket worth $5,500. As the fourth race and fourth winner had been announced, he apparently was whooping it up and attracted the attention of a police officer who questioned him as to his age, discovering he was 16 and therefore technically underage to take out a bet at the races, confiscated the ticket and allegedly tore the ticket up in his presence. Well, did that create a storm of controversy? There were callers, there were postings on the website later on. On the one hand, some people were saying, look, this is ridiculous and it's most unfair. The young man should have had a parent present when he was being interviewed. The evidence has been destroyed. What if the ticket had belonged to someone else? What effect does that have on the odds if a ticket worth $5,500 is not being cashed? Therefore, it should have been more to the others, the other winning bettors. And on the other hand, other people said, no, gambling is insidious and it's destroying our society. One person put on the website, well, I wish someone had torn up my ticket when I was 15 years of age and won nearly $1,800 because it lured me into a life of gambling and all its problems, and my life has been a mess ever since. The sense of perspective that we get on this is very difficult to take. From one perspective, I look at it as part of a church where, well, yes, we have raffles and we have spinning wheels at fates and those sort of things, which are relatively, we might call, I suppose, in self-defence, harmless gambling. On the other hand, I see, and I guess you do too, often the terrible effects of gambling when it gets out of proportion. At the same time, there's a certain degree of, irony in the sense that in this particular case, the police officer who made the investigation was, and tore up the ticket apparently, was employed by the Victorian government to police laws of the Victorian government. So far so good, but the same Victorian government receives 20 to 30% of its revenue through gambling, albeit they would say highly regulated gambling, etc., etc., and all they were doing is enforcing the regulations. And so the debate can go on. I must say, from a personal perspective, I would have used the term, it seems a bit rough. Insofar as I look back at I have a bit of a racing background in my family, and I used to go to the races from time to time, and I can remember the times when, even unbeknown to my parents, I would have literally a bob each way, a shilling each way, and a horse on the flat at Caulfield. But we all have backgrounds like that. This seemed a little bit on the rough edge of things. At the same time, I see, as I mentioned before, people whose lives have been destroyed by gambling. Finding the middle ground, the proper ground, I suppose, to look at some questions in life is never all that easy. One of the things we need to remember that while we may have a particular point of view, there are other points of view which are different from ours, which have legitimacy. Some things in life have a moral context, a moral line, which is very clear in terms of our own human dignity, our obligations to others. Others, well, it depends, just a point of view of how we see things, of where the moral line is to be drawn. And this may be one of those things, although it certainly seems that it was somewhat draconian way of doing things. Maybe it could have been a better way in which that particular case could have been investigated and the young man dissuaded from taking on a life of gambling and difficulties associated with it. Who knows? But I suppose the essence of all this is to recognise that we will often see things from a different perspective than from others. Sometimes we will have a very strong point of view and we will feel very obligated to maintain that and to put that before others, into society, into the way in which we live, in a very strong and defined way. Other cases we can live and let live and say, there's another way of looking at this. one of the key things, I suppose, is to know the difference between the two, to know when we take a strong stand on something and when we can.